The horse came into town by itself. It walked up the main road of Copper Flat on a July afternoon in 1869, slow and steady, its head down and its sides caked with dust and dried sweat, the kind of horse that has been walking for a long time without anyone telling it where to go. The reins were dragging in the dirt. The saddle was dark with something that wasn't sweat, and the man sitting in it was dead. He was slumped forward with his chin on his chest and his hands still tangled in the mane, held in the saddle by nothing but habit and the stiffness that comes when a body stops living, but the muscles haven't figured it out yet. He had been dead for hours, maybe longer. The sun had been working on him, and the flies had found him, and the horse had just kept walking, because that is what horses do when the hand on the reins goes slack. They go to the nearest town. They go to water. Walt Crane was the first one to reach him. Walt ran the livery stable, and he saw the horse coming from the end of the street and walked out to meet it, because a riderless horse means trouble, and a horse with a dead rider means worse. He took the bridle and stopped the horse and looked up at the man in the saddle and saw the bullet wound in his back, a dark hole between the shoulder blades where the shirt had stiffened with dried blood, and he called for the sheriff and the doctor in the same breath. They pulled the man down and laid him in the dirt outside the livery. The doctor confirmed what everyone could see: dead, shot from behind, probably 12 to 18 hours ago, probably while riding. No identification, no letters, no money. His clothes were plain and worn, the kind a drifter wears, and his boots had been resoled twice. The only thing in his pockets was a folding knife and a stub of candle. The only thing on the horse was a canteen, a worn Bible with the name Caleb Morrow scratched into the inside cover with a nail, and a leather saddlebag buckled shut on the right side. Walt opened the saddlebag to look for papers or money or anything that would tell them who this man was and where he had come from and who had put a bullet in his back. He found a wool blanket folded tight. He found a tin of salve. He found a small glass bottle with a rubber nipple, the kind used to feed an infant. And he found, wrapped in the blanket at the bottom of the saddlebag, a baby. She was alive. She was small and red-faced, and her eyes were squeezed shut, and she was not crying, which scared the doctor more than crying would have, because a baby that doesn't cry in that kind of heat is a baby that is running out of time. Walt pulled her out of the saddlebag and held her against his chest, and looked at the dead man in the dirt, and looked at the baby in his arms, and understood that the man had been carrying her, that whatever he was running from, he was running with her, that the bullet in his back had been meant to stop them both, and it had stopped him, but the horse had kept walking, and the baby had kept breathing, and now she was here in the middle of a town that didn't know her name. They never found out who she was. The sheriff sent word to every town within 100 miles, asking about a man named Caleb Morrow and a missing baby, and the word came back empty. No one claimed the man. No one claimed the child. No one came looking. Whoever had shot Caleb Morrow in the back either didn't know about the baby or didn't care, and either way, the baby was alone in the world at an age when alone means dead, unless someone decides otherwise. Walt and Ida Crane decided otherwise. They had been married 14 years, and they had no children, and they had stopped hoping for one. The way people stop hoping for rain in a drought, quietly and without discussion, just a slow acceptance that the thing you wanted most was not coming. And now, here was a baby, pulled from a saddlebag on a dead man's horse, and Ida took her from Walt's arms and held her. And the baby opened her eyes for the first time and looked at Ida with the dark, unfocused stare of a newborn. And Ida said, "Her name is Ilara." And that was that. They raised her. They raised her the way you raise a child on the frontier, with work and sun and dust and the slow, steady rhythm of a life built around cattle and seasons, and the kind of love that doesn't talk about itself because it's too busy hauling water and mending fences. Ilara learned to ride before she could read. She learned to read from a school teacher who came through Copper Flat for 2 years and then left because the territory was hard on school teachers. She learned to rope from Walt and to cook from Ida and to sit on the porch in the evening and watch the sun go down behind the mesas and not say anything, because silence on the frontier is not emptiness, it is fullness. It is the sound of a life that doesn't need to explain itself. They told her the truth when she was 8. Walt sat her on the fence rail behind the barn and told her about the horse and the man and the saddlebag, and Ilara listened the way children listen to stories that are too big for them, with wide eyes and a stillness that is not understanding, but is the beginning of understanding. She asked where she came from, and Walt said he didn't know. She asked who the man was, and Walt said his name was Caleb Morrow, and that was all anyone knew. She asked who her mother was, and Walt looked at Ida standing in the doorway and said, "She's right there." It was enough. For 10 years it was enough. Ilara grew up in Copper Flat, and she was the Crane Girl, and that was her name and her life and her identity. And the story of the saddlebag was just a story. The kind of thing people mentioned at the general store, the way they mentioned the flood of '72 or the time a mountain lion walked into the saloon. A piece of town history that belonged to everyone and to no one. Then she turned 18, and it stopped being enough. It started with the Bible. Walt had kept the dead man's belongings in a wooden box in the barn, the knife and the candle stub, and the Bible and the saddlebag, the way you keep things that belong to the dead, because throwing them away feels like a second killing. Ilara found the box on a spring afternoon when she was looking for a bridle, and the light came through the barn slats at the right angle and caught the brass clasp of the saddlebag. She opened the Bible. She had seen it before, years ago, but she had been a child then, and the book was just a book. Now she was 18, and she looked at it differently. The name scratched into the cover, Caleb Morrow, the pages that had been torn out, 7 of them, rough-edged where they had been pulled from the binding. The remaining pages had marks in them, small lines drawn in pencil beside certain verses, and in the back cover, written in a hand so small she had to hold it in the sunlight to read it, were 2 words, Sycamore Wells. She asked Walt about it that evening. He said he had never looked past the name on the cover. He said Sycamore Wells was a town 60 miles south near the San Pedro River, an old place, mostly Mexican families, and a few ranches, and he had never been there because there was no reason to go. He looked at Ilara the way he had been looking at her for 18 years, with the careful, protective attention of a man who knows that the thing he loves most was given to him by accident and could be taken away by the same. "You're thinking about going," he said. "I have to know. You might not like what you find. I know." Ida packed her food for 3 days. She packed dried beef and hardtack in 2 canteens and a bedroll, and she did it in the kitchen without speaking, because Ida had known this day was coming since the afternoon she took the baby from Walt's arms and named her. You cannot raise a child on a mystery and expect the child to never ask. The mystery is patient. It waits. And when the child is old enough to ride 60 miles alone through the Arizona desert, the mystery says now. Ilara rode south at dawn on a Tuesday in April. The desert opened up around her like a hand unclenching. Red rock mesas and saguaro standing tall against a sky so blue it looked painted. And the trail to Sycamore Wells was a wagon track that wound through arroyos and over ridges and past the bones of cattle that hadn't made it through the last drought. She rode for 2 days, sleeping in a dry wash the first night with her horse tied to a mesquite tree, and the stars so thick above her that they looked like dust scattered on dark cloth. She reached Sycamore Wells on a Wednesday afternoon. It was smaller than Copper Flat, a handful of adobe buildings along the San Pedro River, where cottonwood trees grew thick and the air smelled like water and mud and mesquite bean. The town had the feeling of a place that had been old for a long time and was comfortable with it. Adobe walls 3 feet thick that had stood since before the territory changed hands, wooden vigas jutting from the roof lines, and a church bell that didn't ring anymore because the rope had broken 10 years ago and no one had climbed up to fix it. She asked at the cantina about the name Caleb Morrow and got nothing. The man behind the bar shook his head without looking up from the glass he was wiping, the way bartenders do when they hear a name that means nothing to them, and they want you to know it quickly, so you'll order a drink or leave. She asked at the general store and got nothing. The woman there was newer than the town and didn't know anyone who had lived there before 1875. She asked the old man who ran the livery, and he squinted at her and leaned against the fence post and thought for a long time, the way old men think when they are sorting through decades of faces and names and half-remembered conversations. And then he said he remembered a young couple named Morrow who had lived south of town for one summer, 18 or 19 years ago. And the woman had been with child. And then one day they were gone and nobody knew where. "There's a woman," the old man said. "Dovie Shepherd. She was the midwife back then. Delivered every baby born within 40 miles. She's still alive, last I heard. Lives in the adobe at the end of the river road. She might remember." Alara found the house. It was old, the adobe cracking and the roof beams sagging, and the yard overgrown with creosote and brittlebush. A chicken coop with 3 hens. A wooden bench by the door, worn smooth by years of sitting. And on the bench, a woman so old that the desert seemed young by comparison, with white hair and clouded eyes, and hands folded in her lap like 2 pieces of leather left in the sun. "I'm looking for someone who knew a man named Caleb Morrow," Alara said. Dovie Shepherd looked at her. The old woman's eyes were clouded but not blind, and they moved across Alara's face the way a person's eyes move when they are looking for something they lost a long time ago and have just now found in a place they didn't expect. "You have her face," Dovie said. "Lord help me, you have her face." "Whose face?" "Sit down, child." Alara sat on the bench beside the old woman, and Dovie Shepherd told her the story that no one in Copper Flat had ever known. Caleb Morrow had come to Sycamore Wells in the spring of 1868 with a young wife named Rose. They were running from something, Dovie said, though she never learned what. They rented a small adobe south of town, and Caleb worked odd jobs and Rose was pregnant, and they kept to themselves the way people keep to themselves when they are afraid of being found. Dovie delivered the baby in July, a girl, healthy and loud, and Rose held her and wept with the kind of joy that has fear braided through it, the joy of a woman who knows that happiness is temporary and is holding on to it with both hands. They stayed through the fall. Caleb worked. Rose nursed the baby. Dovie visited once a week to check on them, because that is what midwives did on the frontier. They didn't just deliver the child, they watched over it. They made sure the mother was eating, and the baby was growing and the father wasn't drinking too much or too little. Then in November, Rose got sick. A fever that came fast and burned hot and didn't break. Dovie did what she could with the herbs and tinctures she had, but frontier medicine is honesty wrapped in hope, and the honesty was that Rose was dying. She died on a Tuesday night with the baby in her arms, and Caleb sitting on the floor beside the bed holding her hand, and Dovie sat in the corner and prayed because that was all she had left to give. Caleb buried Rose behind the adobe. He made a cross from mesquite wood and carved her name into it, Rose Ellen Morrow, and the date, and nothing else. Because grief does not write epitaphs. It sits in the dirt and stares at the cross and tries to remember how to breathe. He stayed 2 more weeks. Dovey came every day. She brought food and clean cloth and the small, steady presence of a woman who has seen grief before and knows that the only medicine for it is company and time. Caleb didn't speak much. He fed the baby with the glass bottle and the rubber nipple, and he kept the stove going, and he sat on the floor next to the bed where Rose had died and stared at the wall the way a man stares at something that isn't there anymore, but hasn't stopped being real. Then one morning, Dovey came to check on the baby, and the adobe was empty. Caleb was gone. The baby was gone. The horse was gone. He had left nothing behind except Rose's grave and a wool blanket on the bed and the smell of wood smoke and milk. Dovey never saw him again. She heard, months later, that a man matching his description had been found dead on a horse in a town called Copper Flat, 60 miles north. She heard there had been a baby. She didn't go looking because she was old even then, and 60 miles was a lifetime on the frontier, and she told herself the baby was with someone good, and that was enough. "It wasn't enough," Dovey said. "I should have gone. I should have found you." Ilara sat on the bench beside the old woman and looked at the desert and felt the story settle into her the way water settles into dry ground, slowly and then all at once. She had a mother. Her name was Rose. She had been loved. She had died holding her daughter. And her father, Caleb Morrow, had wrapped her in a blanket and put her in a saddlebag and ridden 60 miles north through the Arizona desert with a bullet in his back, and the horse had walked into Copper Flat and the baby had lived. And here she was, 18 years later, sitting on a bench with the woman who had brought her into the world. "Who shot him?" Ilara asked. "I don't know. Caleb was running from something when he came here. Someone he owed. Someone he'd wronged. Someone who wanted what he had or wanted him dead. The frontier is full of men like that. The frontier is full of reasons to put a bullet in someone's back. But whoever it was, they didn't know about you. Or they didn't care. And Caleb rode 60 miles with that bullet in him because he had already lost Rose, and he was not going to lose you too." Ilara looked at the old woman's hands, folded and still and spotted with age. She looked at the crumbling adobe and the chicken coop and the mesquite growing wild in the yard. She thought about her mother, a woman she would never see except in the reflection Dovey saw when she looked at Ilara's face. She thought about Caleb Morrow, a man she would never know except as a name scratched into a Bible, and a body in a saddle and a saddlebag that held her like a cradle while a horse walked 60 miles to the nearest town. "Can you show me the grave?" she asked. Dovey walked her to the old adobe south of town. It was a ruin now, the roof fallen in and the walls crumbling back to earth, but behind it, under a mesquite tree that had grown thick and tall in 18 years, there was a wooden cross gray with age and a mound of stones that someone, Dovey, Ilara realized, had kept clear of weeds. Rose Ellen Morrow, November 1868. Ilara knelt in the dirt beside her mother's grave and put her hand on the stones and stayed there for a long time. She didn't cry. She had inherited that from somewhere, the ability to hold grief inside like water in a clay jar, contained and still and heavy. She stayed until the sun moved behind the mesquite tree and the shade fell across the grave, and the desert went quiet the way the desert goes quiet in the late afternoon, when the heat lets go and the land can finally breathe. She rode back to Copper Flat with the Bible in her saddlebag, and the name of her mother in her chest, and the understanding that the man who died bringing her to safety had carried two things across 60 miles of desert with a bullet in his back. A baby and a love so fierce that death itself couldn't make him let go of the reins. Walt and Ida were on the porch when she rode in. They were sitting the way they always sat in the evening, Walt in the wooden chair and Ida on the bench with her mending, and they looked up when they heard the horse, and their faces held the same expression, the careful, hopeful, terrified look of parents who have been waiting for a child to come home and are not sure what the child will be when she arrives. Alara dismounted. She walked to the porch and sat on the step between them and told them everything. Rose, the fever, the grave under the mesquite tree, Dovey Shepherd and her clouded eyes, and her steady hands that had brought Alara into the world. She told them, and they listened, and when she was done, Ida put her hand on Alara's shoulder, and Walt looked out at the desert and the mesas and the sky going orange above them and said, "You have two mothers now. I know. That's more than most people get." Alara leaned against the porch rail and watched the sun go down behind the red rock mesas, the way she had watched it go down 1,000 times before. Except now the sunset was different because she was different. Because knowing where you come from changes the color of everything, even the sky. She was Alara Crane. She was also the daughter of Rose and Caleb Morrow. She was the baby in the saddlebag, the girl who rode 60 miles in a dead man's saddle, the question that had finally found its answer in a crumbling adobe and an old woman's memory in a grave under a mesquite tree. The stars came out, the desert cooled, and somewhere between Copper Flat and Sycamore Wells, on a trail that wound through arroyos and over ridges and past the places where the bones of old stories bleach in the sun, the distance between two lives closed to nothing, and a woman who had come back for answers found something she hadn't been looking for. She found where she began,